I find it quite rare that an AWP prospect actually excites me. They're either simply not good enough and farming low-tier competition, or they're Munacy, and any fool could have told you Munacy had a future in Tier 1. Daniil Molodoy Golubenko is certainly closer to the Munacy end of the spectrum than he is, obviously, to the Tier 3 farmer, but finding him and assessing him isn't quite that simple. His competitive career can be traced back to 2020 with an appearance at a small Asian Cup. Molodoy didn't go deep, his team of Snow Leopards going straight down to the lower bracket, winning a single series before going out at the hands of now Virtus Pro player Icy. Another pair of small appearances at Middle Asian Cups in 2023, these are the final entrances into the ledger before CS2 comes around, and both with a familiar ending. A loss to the hands of that same Kazakh Virtus Pro AWPer. At this point, Molodoy's talent is turning enough heads to earn him a pretty regular gig in the sequel. Under the All-Inners banner, playing alongside some other Kazakh grinders, Molodoy was able to find some deep runs at events time and time again. These were all, of course, local events, but some of them were big enough to get some HLTV coverage. In these matches where we actually have a rating, there was a common thread: Molodoy popping the fuck off. The All-Inners stint was starting to build something of a reputation for Molodoy. Sure, the Kazakh scene knew he was good, but there was something of an aura developing amongst other regions and people following lower tier CS. We'd hear stories about this AWPer who'd never really played on LAN, only played in LAN cafes, didn't have a PC at home, played with 100 ping, and yet absolutely destroyed everyone. His big break came when DMS took a shot, bringing him in to replace Height. This move brought a higher level of competition, finally some recognizable tier 3 teams here, but it did very little to stop or slow down his output. Across 70 maps with this new team, Molodoy was able to, of course, put up his great numbers against the tier 3 teams, but also when tier 2 competition came knocking, he maintained his level. This roster's results led to them being picked up by AWPer, who were trying to distance themselves from their reputation of playing just ugly CS. Now this is where we pick up the Molodoy story. AWPer's roster have been really struggling to find consistent results, playing a lot of qualifiers, never quite making it through at the rate we'd like. But Molodoy all along putting up a 1.26 rating, I think, across the last 57 maps, an absolutely insane level of output, despite a team who struggled to find consistent rifle play to go alongside him. We're going to dive into what makes Molodoy such a fantastic talent, and what makes him uniquely himself. I'll also be trying to answer the question of what should we expect from Molodoy in the years to come. As an AWPer, the defensive end is where you can typically get a little more creative. You get to take early peeks into the CT side, and you get to make little mid-round incursions, insertions, and rotations to allow yourself to get active. The pinnacle of this kind of play is probably Torji, at least at a relatable level. The ridiculous shot making of certain AWPers makes the theory behind what they do and why a little harder to grasp. He brings so much style and all these little embellishments to Mouse's play that he's really become the standard go-to for me personally when it comes to a CT AWPing demo. Molodoy seems aware of this and seems very conscious of the impact he can have with the big green in his hands, and it leads to him going for the AWP no armor buy quite often on the first gun round of the CT side. Winning the first gun round is critical, and AWPer are far more likely to do that with Molodoy on a sniper. To enable this requires a little extra cash in the pocket, especially after a pistol loss. It's a good thing Molodoy's an absolute demon in the pistol rounds. In 2025, Molodoy has a casual 1.6 rating on CT pistols, almost guaranteed to find at least one pistol kill. His pre-aims and adjustments with his pistol of choice are sublime. We also get our first glimpse of the main theme of these demos, something that comes up time and time again, Molodoy the hero. On occasions, he'll play a CT pistol with a pair of dualies and Kevlar. This here is a classic example against Golden Garage, dualies to do it all, and he delivers. The armorless AWP certainly is a risk, though it does help when you hit your shots incredibly quickly and consistently. Of course, this is the case for Molodoy, who can hit moving targets with outstanding consistency in these demos. Targets jumping, swinging, or sliding all get taken care of, without mentioning the more static individuals. A detail that helps him out with all the types of shots he likes to take is his incredible speed and his counter-strafing shot. Without it, he's just holding lines, which is nice but low impact. There is a strong urge in Molodoy to go and look for ways to win around whenever possible. The gaps available are often pounced upon, with Molodoy placing a lot of trust in his abilities and his read on the game. This is a part of what allows him to put up such gaudy numbers. He isn't limited to playing deep lines and praying the T's peak him, then playing retakes and clutches. He's got a mid-round presence you don't often see in forgettable AWPers. Something that took me a while to really pick up on and notice, and Molodoy doesn't play that much with the team. You'll see early he'll maybe use some utils, set up the initial brawlers of the team to go take some map control, but otherwise not so present in terms of being able to trade his teammates' deaths. And that's something I find a little bit weird. Now, it can either speak to a game planning problem where Amcal are not using him properly, like not bringing him in on certain ideas, instead letting him just lock down a solo area time and time again. Or it could just be a lack of feel for when and where to rotate. I don't want to be a doomer. I'm going to assume it's just poor calling, but it is a bit of an odd thing I've noticed that he has very low trading numbers. And when you watch his demos, it just seems to be the way they play. Now, the AWPers that are tier 2 and I believe truly elite, it's basically Grix, Molodoy, and not much else. Grix even doesn't match him in terms of CT opening attempts. Molodoy is an incredibly proactive, dynamic sort of AWPer in that sense. It's just very little trade kill involvement, where you see a player like Grix, if you take a look at his play, there's far more involvement in terms of actually trading out teammates' deaths, so something to keep an eye on there. Just to round him out as a defender, Molodoy is a very strong rifler, with a few defensive rounds on the M4 standing out. It would be a waste of his AWPing to keep him on a rifle any longer than necessary, so I'm glad he doesn't have to showcase it often. The few rounds I do have of him rifling are more than enough to convince me of his abilities though, as even off the zoom banger, he's incredibly effective. For reference, his rating on an M4A1S in 2025 per Skybox Edge is 1.50. Statistically superior to his AWP, though in a tiny sample, and with the advantage of being an absolute eco mowdown machine. Not that he's got a particular tendency towards eco fragging, it's just a fact that rifles are better against half-buys and ecos. Just is what it is. I already talk about utility usage, and with AWPers, it's often very standardized. Molodoy, I can assure you, throws every piece of util he needs to know with fairly strong consistency. There's nothing to be alarmed about. But he does throw less utility than the average tier 1 AWPer. There's just less utility in these games in general, but he does throw what he needs to throw. One tendency I did notice that's sort of unique to him in terms of his util usage is that he likes to pop smokes that bloom in front of him immediately. Like I noticed in the demos, he doesn't wait very often. Doesn't try to let the T side come through, maybe build up behind it. No, instantly pop it, go, take a shot. All in all, defensively, yeah, we go from pistol to straight to the AWP. Even if he's on an M4, whatever he's doing, he's going to do incredibly well. There was a point where I genuinely thought he might be his team's best anchor. When I'm watching the demos, like especially on Ancient, that A site, he plays essentially the A player with the AWP. It's not that shocking. But when he's on the actual bomb site itself, or when he's holding a push from Donut, honestly, as good, if not better, than almost every rifler I've watched at this tier. In terms of positioning, hitting the shots, just did it right. Now, we do have to come back to that level of play, the amount of util in being used. We'll come to that towards the end, but at least compared to his compatriots, his men-at-arms, he's a very strong rifler, does the job as well, if not better than them. So take from that what you will. The T side. Historically, a bit boring and pedestrian on a lot of demos. A part where AWPers just really struggle to find themselves involved in the play and doing anything other than throwing flashbangs. Statistically, AWPers take a huge KPR hit on the T side, having to rely more on their rifles due to the economy, but also, honestly, due to a feeling of comfort. I think there are a lot of maps that have historically been just a bit tough to get a lot of AWPing play on the T side, and relying on your rifling abilities to get yourself involved in the game and keep up with the pace the team need to play at has just made sense. Most AWPers drop from their 0.5 sniper kills per round on the CT side somewhere around 0.3. With tier 2 AWPers sometimes being able to maintain a number slightly higher than that, given the nature of the level of play. Then there's Molodoy, who's at 0.4. He really is a pure AWPer who refuses to give it up. He's going to just keep playing with his AWP over and over again. Over half of all his multi-kills on the T side are with the AWP, so are almost all his opening frags as well. This is what makes him kind of one of a kind to follow as an AWPing prospect. He's not bound by the meta where snipers have become a lot like reluctant riflers, but he uses the AWP instead just as often as possible. Now, after having a few slower Ancient maps on the T side, he did try to use the AK a bit more within the meta, as in, you use your AK until you get a free AWP or until you're 6-0 up and you just switch it out. We see here his aim is still sharp, pre-aims are nice, the things that make him good with a pistol make him good with an AK. And of course, the pistol side of things still rings true. Even if in 2025 the numbers aren't anywhere near as good as they were in 2024, he does still often take point with the P250. Hero Molodoy raising his head again, and it leads to some moments of brilliance, but some also brutal rating-destroying solo deaths. I think he'll return to the rating he carried in 2024 before long, as he's not losing his edge and still clearly very sharp. One thing to make clear is that he's not as proactive on the T side as he was on the CT side, but that's all relative. He's still far more proactive than the average AWPer at this level, or at any level, realistically is. I think he's got an opening kill attempt rate of like 17% on the T side, which as an AWPer is almost unheard of. I mean, Grix 0.14, and Grix is a fairly aggressive, combative AWPer, so that does paint the picture. Molodoy does need and does like to take a lot of opening duels. Well, he does win them most of the time. The only problem is that getting himself involved in the mid-round on T side is a little more questionable. We return to this problem of a low trade kill rate. There's just not a lot going on. I do see sometimes like the spacing for him seems a bit suboptimal, or there's like players taking space and he's holding a line that's just needed but brings him out of the action if there is contact made by those rifle players. And so occasionally you do see him have a little bit more of a scrap in the mid-round, or like there's multiple kills offered up in the area that he's gone looking for a single pick, and he'll hit those shots. He's an outstanding AWPer, don't get me wrong. It's just, I wish we saw more of him in with the pack, or doing something to play off the shoulder. Spots where a lot of AWPers, especially at the next level, really thrive. I'm just not seeing a lot of opportunity in these demos. Now, of course, going for these opening picks, his shot making is outstanding. I don't think there's a lot of players who can outduel him, and he can even swing into some AWPers and just pick them off. He's that quick. Now, I did say he's got a weakness in the mid-round. Doesn't have much of a problem in the late round, though. Oh man, this guy is actually kind of cracked. He does give the energy sometimes of that guy in matchmaking who's having to carry the team, but he also isn't really trusting them. So you'll see early he goes for his picks, cool. Mid-round doesn't really seem too connected to the play. Late round comes alive, wins the round. He has a 0.06, I think, clutch points per round for his career, which is elite. On the T side explicitly. Like his T side clutch rate is outstanding, and his ability to hit flicks and take the right fights and all these little details make him so well rounded on these post plants, or so well rounded, honestly, just in these clutches in general. Doesn't always have to be with the bomb down. Very few players are able to outshoot him, and also very few players are able to outfox him, like, catch him off, get him in the wrong angle. Very little of that going down. Now, all of that I just said about him in the clutch applies to him when there's a teammate alive. In the post plant, he's very strong. He's back to defending a bomb site, really. He can pick his lines, pick his moments to peek his head out and take a shot. It's just the frustration I have with the trading of it all. None of it's happening. He's not very connected to the play. Please tell me this is a calling issue and not a Molodoy problem. Molodoy has been putting up incredible numbers time and time again for these teams. I'm quite excited for his future and his development. Now, assessing him as a prospect in terms of where to put him in the pecking order, where he lands on the graphs, it's rather difficult, however. Firstly, he's an AWPer, so his upward potential in the scene is quite explosive, even if it's not guaranteed. Just think about Ultimate, who went from not being on any roster to tier 1 in a matter of minutes, and it kind of worked. I mean, it's not been super consistent, but it kind of can just work like that. Now, secondly, his level of competition has been incredibly weak. He hasn't recorded a single map against a top 20 HLTV opponent ever, and a very limited sample against top 30 rated opponents, and only 21 maps against teams in the top 50, and even then, his rating's 1.14. I mean, it's a terrible sample. Team probably got smashed, but still, there's not a lot to go off in terms of really good teams he's playing against. This was actually highlighted the most aggressively when I was watching his advanced playoffs matches. I think against Golden Garage or LFO3, famously great teams. And he's just farming them in a way. Like, he's just taking the same peaks over and over again. He knows he's better. He's kind of BM. He's just going for it over and over again. And he's getting the kills. And it's great. It's just, I don't think all of this works if you have to play Bait. If you have to play OG. If you have to play Johnny Speeds. If you have to play Aurora. I don't think this is maintainable. And that's my fear. Now, mechanically, sublime. Explosive fragging. He can hit basically every shot presented to him on every gun, but we're going to stick to the AWP for now. His flicking's outstanding. Great combat player. Explosive factors are all there. Now, for the control side, I guess we'll rate him on his pistol and rifle play, which is pretty strong. Again, level of competition remains the issue. I'll give him a decent grade, but he's not going to look like an elite mechanical player in comparison to everyone else, just because I still don't like the low-level comparisons. Currently, I think his level is quite far from tier 1. Not only do we have the problems of who he's actually played against, but in terms of realistically what he does in the demo, whilst he goes for all his opening picks over and over again, and you think, oh, that's great, there's not actually that much diversity. The playbook isn't that deep compared to a player of higher level. I can only say what I've seen him do, and it's been pretty unimaginative. And the lack of involvement in the mid-round, in terms of the trading, the rotations, on the CT side especially. T side's less alarming, realistically, but it's mostly that CT problem, where it's explosive openings to a round and making things work and making big plays by himself. But should he have to be making the plays by himself all the time is the problem. And I think part of the problem is his lack of fluidity in terms of his position. Now, I do think he has a pro-level future. You know, he can hit every shot. He's got the talent. I just think there's a lot that needs to be refined and developed in terms of his approach to the game and his understanding of his role within the team unit, if that is going to happen. Now, still, he's a great prospect, brimming with talent. He just needs to develop some of the more nuanced sides of the game, I guess positional sides of the game, when it comes to playing with a team and putting faith in them, understanding how to play with them, for me to really be believing in his tier 1 potential. And now, though, still one of my favorite demos to watch. And an incredible player. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed, leave a like, leave a comment telling me your thoughts on Molodoy. As you can tell by my attire, it is currently a ripping 20 degrees in London, which is basically a heat wave, so you're welcome. And remember to sub if you want more content, and become a member if you want more prospect-related content especially, but also there's exclusive interviews for members, rights to vote, things like that. It's a pretty cool set of little perks for a pretty reasonable price, if I'm going to be honest. But yeah. With all that in mind, see you next time. Goodbye.